Good morning. I'm Joan Carter. I'm going to be your moderator today. On behalf of Jason Bruns at the Minnesota State Engineering Center of Excellence and Katie Jameson from the Engineering Alliance Foundation of Minnesota, we welcome you this morning and we thank you for coming. We ask that you change your screen name to your name and your affiliation. If you would, at least your name. You do that by either going to the participant list and finding your name and scrolling over to more, or if you scroll over your box, then there's an ellipses in the corner and you can do it there as well. And so anyway, thank you again for coming, and I'm gonna just get us right now started by turning it over to Dr. David Safner. David?
All right, good morning, everyone. I teach civil engineering at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I help the American Society of Civil Engineers run a Excellence in Civil Engineering Education, so ASCE Exceed. So most of my slides came from that, and I'm pretty happy to be talking to you about learning objectives in assessment, because historically, when we look at participant feedback for this workshop that's been going on for over 20 years now, the most impactful thing that we talk about in the workshop is learning objectives, and that was definitely true of me. So you got to start a seminar about learning objectives with learning objectives. So while you read those, I'll tell you, I'm not trying to sell you a used car here. This is before and after learning objectives. Holy cow, the difference in my teaching. That's the single most impactful thing that I've done to change my teaching in the 15 years that I've been at this. So here's a good example of why. Prior to using learning objectives, as a new instructor, you sat me down and I had 40 lessons, and they're supposed to be spending 2 hours outside of class for every hour inside of class. I know I'm going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 exams, depending on how the class is set up. Oh man, that was intimidating. So now I've got a plan for how to attack this, and I put it in order here, but that's not really how I think about it. I like to think about this as an iterative process, where now I'll say, I'm talking about foundation bearing capacity today. So let me define some things that are important about foundation bearing capacity. And then I'm going to base my in-class instructions off of that. And then I'm going to base my homework off of that. But as I set up my in-class instruction and my homework, I often discover like, oh, there's an important piece that I left out. So I have to go back and write a learning objective for, you know, as I'm setting up my class, I realize I don't really need that one learning objective. So I cut that. That's not important. So it is a pretty iterative process for me. I really like learning objectives because it provides, as an instructor, it provides me a very clear roadmap, very well defined. And I keep hearing the term transparent teaching recently. That's a buzzword that I really like. So you're being really open with the students. Here's what I want you to learn. Here's what I hope you take away from my course. This is the important stuff today. So you're setting them up for success by giving them the same roadmap that I'm following. When I write learning objectives, one thing that can intimidate students, so I like to point this out, is that these learning objectives cover what you should be able to do after a sequence of stuff. It's not right away. You still have to prep for class. You participate in class, and then there's still that 2 hours outside of class for every hour inside, right? You still have to put in the time to do the homework, do the projects, work with your study group. So when I first started using learning objectives, I wondered if I was intimidating the students by saying, hey, you got to design this foundation for bearing capacity. And they're like, holy smokes, class is over and I can't do that yet. So it is a process. And I'm teaching 2 classes with semester-long design projects right now, one at the senior level and then an intro to civil engineering class at the freshman level. And both of these have learning objectives for them that are going to take them all 15 weeks to accomplish. So they just keep chugging away at it. So I like to highlight that with the students. some new bullets for you to read there. The two I'll highlight right now: measurable action verbs. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. Making these learning objectives measurable is very important. Things like appreciate geotechnical engineering or learn the or the engineering design process. These aren't very helpful for students because my definition of appreciate and yours are probably two different things. So making it real clear what you're asking from them is important. And as an instructor, I found that last bullet to be a game changer for me. Prior to using learning objectives, holy smokes, it was hard to write an exam. It used to take me all weekend, and the first exam I wrote was an absolute disaster. I think it was a 4-hour exam that I gave them 50 minutes to do. It was a disaster. But I have an exam tomorrow. I wrote it over the weekend, and it took me less than an hour because I copied all my learning objectives. I put it in a Word file, and I just started filling in details. You know, I just had to give them the framework, but the objectives were already written, and therefore my test was already written. And I'll give you an example of that here in a couple slides. I like to use Bloom's taxonomy for writing my learning objectives. And I encourage you to Google this if you haven't seen this before, because there's all sorts of ways to visualize Bloom's. Some of these are progressive, like I have here, kind of a ladder, stepping up the ladder. Some of these are in a wheel. And I think the different visualizations are good because one really does depend on the other. So this sequential thing takes something away from it in my mind. So if you haven't played with this before, Google this. There's a bunch of ways to view this that I think are beneficial. So I'll give you Dave Safner's take on these things. These are how these stick in my head. The remember category, that bottom one, there's a coffee shop down the hill that does trivia night. So who won the World Series 10 years ago? What was best picture last year? These are sort of things that come up in remember. I ask you a question, can you Google it, right? That's the remember category. Comprehend is being able to put things in your own words. Apply is to be able to calculate something. So figure out this problem. Analyze is when you start taking a whole bunch of those apply systems and putting them together into a bigger thing. And below that line on my slide, grading is easy because I know the answer is 6 newtons or whatever the answer is, right? Above that line, grading gets difficult because now there's not one unique solution anymore. We can all have different answers. So synthesize is the design process, and evaluate is figure out what the design is. And as we all know, the design, it accounts for so many different competing factors. It's hard to hit a home run in all of them. So I emphasize this factor and you emphasize a different factor, and now we have 2 different answers. You'll notice Bloom did this in the 50s and 60s. Anderson updated this in the early 2000s. And it's another way to visualize this that I think is helpful. When Anderson updated this, he switched evaluate and synthesize. So he put evaluate before synthesize. And ASCE at least thinks that you do the design first, and then you analyze which design is best and make your updates. But looking at it the other way, I think is interesting. And certainly if you want to, you know, maybe you're related to Anderson and you really want to do it his exact way. So go ahead and flip him at that point. Again, Google has all sorts of lists like this available. I put this up here to highlight the measurable verbs that I talked about earlier. In each one of these categories, there's verbs that you can start your learning objectives with, and you'll notice all of these are measurable. There's no appreciate, learn, understand. You can't put understand, appreciate, and learn on an exam. All of these things work for exam questions. And it's nice for me to having this list sit in front of me right here on my desk when I go through and prep my my classes. It really helps me kind of wrap my head around which level I'm really asking them to get at, and maybe I'm asking them to do something too low when I could be pushing this into a higher Bloom level and better preparing them for professional practice. I wanted to step you through an example of how I do this. This is a copy of a page out of my study guide in my junior level required class, introducing them to my sub-discipline in civil engineering, which is geotechnical, soil and rock. So you can say for each lesson, I lay out the learning objectives. When I'm face-to-face, the first board always has my learning objectives, and then I can come back and refer to it throughout class. And now that we're online, I still write the learning objectives on one of my little tablet boards. And, in class, I'll flip back to that one and show it to them. So you can see here what I'm asking them to do. At the start of class, I like providing a big picture. Hey, here's why you care. Think back to that, that cartoon of the second grade class where, can I ask where you're going with this with the subtraction problems? I like showing them where we're going. For geotechs, going to the Leaning Tower of Pisa is a required pilgrimage. It's settling because of consolidation settlement. So if you look on one side, the clay layer is this thick, and the other side, the clay layer is this thick. So as they built that building, it started to tip. That's why it's tipping. I wonder if you've been there, unmute, see if you can answer this. I'm looking this direction at the Leaning Tower of Pisa. If I look behind me, does anyone know what you see? You turn around and look the opposite direction. Has anyone been there? You see a bunch of tourists taking pictures of themselves holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I like looking back there. You can see there's just a whole line of people getting things of. I thought that was funny. Didn't have to do with learning objectives, but it's funny. So here, this is what I present in class. I got the left goes up on the board, the right are my notes. One of the benefits of learning objectives was, so I sat down one summer, I'm gonna write some learning objectives. I looked at my old notes. I could cut half to 2/3 of the stuff I used to say in class, because now I'm focusing only on those learning objectives, which allows me to get into things that really let the students engage with the material, things like example problems, teamwork, reflection, discussion, whatever sort of engagement you want in your class. This is where the time comes from. I cut the extraneous stuff. After class, writing my homeworks, exams, nice and easy. You can see here's a learning objective, and I have the exact same words down there in the homework. I give them a picture. Here's the situation. Apply the learning objectives to these handful of situations. I have a project. The project tasks come directly out of my learning objectives. Here's an exam. I've set up a situation here. I'm moving quickly, but I bet you don't want to take my exam, right? Here, just trust me. I set up an exam here. I set up a situation. The questions and the things that I ask them to do on the exam are exactly from the learning objectives. Real game changer for me. I'm having a study session tonight for an exam that I'm giving tomorrow. Before learning objectives, what do you think the most common question that I got at my review sessions was? I'd hold a review sessions and students would come in. I'd say, all right, what are your questions for the exam? What do you think they hit me with right away?
What's on the exam and how many questions on the exam? What's on the exam?
What's going to be on the test was the most common question. Tonight, when I hold the review session, it's going to be a whole different ball game. Hey, I'm struggling with lesson 7's learning outcome number 2. Can you set up a problem so that we can go through it? That's a much better way for the students to engage. The stress is lower, the learning is higher. It's, I can't emphasize it enough. Learning objectives, game changer for me. Really happy I got into that. So at this point, we got time for some questions, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms, and the next slide shows you something that you could tackle in the breakout room. We could go different direction if that's the small groups thing, but I got an idea for what we can do in the breakout rooms. But I'm happy to answer any of your questions now. And I don't have the bandwidth to read a chat and talk at the same time. So I saw some chats. I wonder if there's.
I'll monitor the chats for you, David.
Okay,
so far,
good. Thank you.
Everything's okay. But yes, if anybody has questions, now would be the time. Maybe you want to unshare for just a second so that you can see if somebody's trying to talk to you. And then we'll go back and see your breakout room before that. Are there any questions for David?
Well, I got a quick question. What percent of the time or percent of the class time do you go back and review prerequisites? For example, like the del function that they should have learned when they were freshmen, or simple fluids, Bernoulli's equation that you get the deer in the headlights. What percent of the time do you go backwards?
I guess it depends on the topic. I did something in class yesterday where they needed to know the trapezoidal rule from Calc 2. So I said, this is the trapezoidal rule from Calc 2. I'm going to assume you know it and move on. Then there's other things. Method of poles, principal stress equations, stuff like this for mechanics that I apply. I really need them to understand it, and they're aware of the terms, but they don't, they need review in that. So I guess in that class, probably when I talk that, it's half the class is review, but there's other times I skip by it. It's, I guess it depends on the issue.
David, do you want to show your slide about the breakout rooms?
Sure.
A couple of minutes before.
So I was thinking of an activity that helped me when I was first learning objectives was, if you don't already have learning objectives, to think of the next class you're going to teach, which might be pretty soon for some of us, right? Like in an hour or so. So maybe the next class that you have bandwidth to think about, and see if you can write some learning objectives for that class. And if you already have learning objectives, I find reviewing them occasionally helps me out a lot, because like I said earlier, some of them are written at too low a Bloom's level, and I can be asking students I can be challenging them more and better preparing them for practice by increasing the Bloom's level. So if you already have them, see if there's a way to move those higher on Bloom's scale, and if you don't, take a shot at writing them.
Sorry, getting to my unmute. I've sorted you all into breakout rooms, and so I'm going to send you off there. If you have any issues, you can come back to the main room, and I will reassign you or whatever has to happen. But it'll give you a chance to talk in small groups.
Aaron Budge from Mankato is also here, and he is also a mentor at this ASCE Exceed program. So him and I will wander around the breakout rooms and check in with you.
Good to go. Looking forward to it.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to send you all off now. Have some fun. Meet some people. Try to briefly introduce yourselves, and then talk about learning objectives.
It's out to internships.
Yeah, I can speak to our group. I also had somebody from the TRIO group at Metro, and then I also had a K-12 STEM instructor at the post-secondary level, and he discussed how much they're already incorporating. They incorporate that into their education level and how it all connects up together. But then that also rolled us into the importance of those learning objectives and how they pertain back into the STEM that he teaches and his students receive on the importance of that. And then with the TRIO group, where does that fall into some of the curriculum on what they deliver and how important that is for the information that they share with their young STEM students also, and the 9 through 12 students.
Yeah, this is Terry Christopher. I'm a professional engineer working at Universal Engineering Services, and we did not have any teachers in our group, but one of the things that we brought up, similar to what Nancy brought up, is about if there's a way to put into the learning curriculum experiences, like internships are great, be able to get out there and have a little practical experience. That would help tremendously when we're working with new engineers.
one last one before we move on? Or are we ready to go? Any questions or anything before we move on to our next segment?
I have a quick report. We had a couple of professionals, a couple
Okay.
of educators, and we talked about ways that professionals and STEM educators can really continue collaborating right now as everybody is reinventing everything daily in the online space. So, you know, how can we keep up some of these conversations, continue working together? Are there ways to have more, you know, virtual tours, other ways that the industry can support what STEM educators are doing? So really finding value in having these connections and these conversations as everybody navigates the upcoming months.
And there's a chat that says, just an idea on virtual tours and videos in different companies. It may help in an asynchronous environment. If students can see how a day looks like in a different engineering careers. And I have gotten some virtual tours that are happening, but that would be good for them to be recorded because sometimes students can't go at the time it is. That's a good idea. Okay, thank you everybody. That was wonderful. Thank you, David. We're gonna move on now to our second section, which is ethics and cheating in the 21st century. And I'm gonna turn it over to Benita Crow. Thank you, Benita.
Good morning, Joan. I do need a little help about, I'm a GoToMeeting person. I'm not as familiar with Zoom, so how do I go ahead and share my screen?
At the bottom, there's a green button that says share screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can pick which screen you want. So then just pick your PowerPoint.
So let's see.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure. That's why I was hesitating that you
Sure.
were able to it. There you go. Excellent.
Did it work?
Yep, it's there.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, so good morning. My name is Benita Crow, and I work for Short Elliott Hendrickson. I have been a practicing civil engineer for the last 20 years, and I am here today to talk a little bit about engineering ethics. So let's start with understanding the difference between morals and ethics, because I think a lot of people use these two terms interchangeably, but they are different. So morals are best described as your own personal principles, what you believe to be right or wrong. Ethics, on the other hand, are described as external rules. So these are a standard that others set as to what is right or wrong. So in both cases, morals and ethics do drive right or wrong behavior or good or bad behavior. So morals, as I said, they're your own personal principles. So they're the habits and behavior based on what you believe to be right or wrong, good or bad. It's your individual code of conduct or your personal core values. So think of it in terms of how you would want your child to behave. So morals are governed by social and cultural norms. So this can be different in different areas. We've all heard the term Minnesota nice and how Midwesterners are characterized in a certain way. So this develops based on what is considered acceptable social behavior. Morals rarely change. When you think about the term or the phrase, a zebra doesn't change its stripes, or we are who we are, generally speaking, most people develop their morals early on in their life, and that drives their behavior moving forward. Simple examples of morals, at least these are the three that popped up in my head when I was putting this together, is never lie. Treat others the way that you want to be treated, and be kind. So ethics, as I mentioned, a lot of people use morals and ethics interchangeably, but they are different. So what we're talking about today is the guiding principles considered as a standard as to what is right or wrong, good or bad. They are dependent on the definition of others. So organizations, industry standards, they often define what a standard of ethics is or what that means. They're governed by individual or legal professional norms. So ethics can be as simple as just abiding by the law, following the law. They may change over time or based on environment or experiences. So if you think about recycling, for example, throwing out the garbage out of the window of your car 30 years ago probably wasn't considered unethical. It would be now. That's because our environment has changed over those last 30 years. So some examples of ethics, honesty about experience and competence. So let's say you have a few trees right around your house and you're looking for a tree contractor to come out and cut those down because they're leaning towards your house. So you find a tree contractor that has 20 years of experience, you hire them, they come out, they cut down the trees, one falls on your house. You look back on that and you find out that the tree contractor only had 2 years of experience. So that's an example of somebody that wasn't honest about their experience and competence, you know, and that is considered unethical if you try to exaggerate or emphasize some skill set that you actually don't have. Fairness, completing a scope of work for which a cost proposal was based. So basically doing what you said you would do for the cost that you provided. Another example is sense of responsibility to the community, or the sense of responsibility to the community over your own individual gain, for example. Focusing on something that provides the greatest good for the most people as opposed to what might be best for you individually. Morals versus ethics. I've said this about 3 times in this presentation so far. They aren't the same, but there are some nuances. So a person can abide by a guiding set of ethical principles, yet not have moral integrity. So when you think about this, someone could be a really great ethical engineer, follow all the standards of ethics, but perhaps in their personal life, they could discriminate against a person of color or somebody of a different gender. On the other hand, a person can violate a standard of ethics, but have a really high sense of morals. So for example, someone could be the absolute kindest, most honest person in the world, but then make a decision to not resolve a construction error in order to save money for their company. So again, concepts are similar, but they're very different. So I want to just give some quick examples, and these are actually 3 very common examples of applying engineering ethics. So the first one is a Band-Aid instead of a true fix. So imagine a set of plans that have a design area that needs to be fixed. So these plans are out in the field, contractors using them, they notice that there's an error in the plans. Since it was an error on the part of the engineer, the cost for the fix is on the engineer. So 2 ways to fix it. One way would be cheaper, but it may not last as long. A second way, and maybe the right way to fix it, is more expensive. Client would know the difference. You could do it either way and they would not know the difference. So does the engineer go the cheaper route to save money? Or does the engineer do the correct fix that should have been done originally? So if you're abiding by professional ethics, that means the engineer, in this case, they should fix the error correctly and the way it should have been shown on the plans. Another good example is dollars versus duty. So play out this scenario where a client is paying a project engineer to be on site, on the construction site, for the duration of the project per the terms of the contract between the client and the engineer. So the project manager realizes that the contract that she negotiated with that client did not include enough time for that project engineer to be on site for the duration of the contract. So she realized that she committed to having personnel on site, but she did not include that time in her fee. So in this scenario, does she abide by what the contract says? And she has the project engineer on site for the duration of the whole project? Or does she tell that engineer maybe to come in at 9 o'clock, show up at 9 o'clock instead of 6 in the morning, or leave at 3 instead of stay until 5 in order to save on the project budget? So professional ethics means that she will abide, as a project manager, she will abide by the terms of the contract, and she will have that project engineer on site for the duration of the project. The last one I had up there is conflict of interest, because these happen all the time. And it's really important to recognize when they happen and then to make the right decision. So imagine a small engineering firm in northern Minnesota, works for a small community, a city, for example, and they put together a set of plans and specifications for a road reconstruction project. A contractor reaches out to that same engineering firm and asks that firm to work for the contractor on the job, providing construction staking. So now the engineering firm needs to decide if it's acceptable to work for both the client and the contractor and get that additional contract and get that additional fee, or if they should decline that opportunity to work for the contractor, recognizing that working for both the client and the contractor might be a conflict of interest. So recognizing those potential conflicts of interest and then making the right decision as to what to do is abiding by professional ethics. So in this case, the engineer should decline the opportunity to work for the contractor and to continue work solely for their client. So why are professional ethics important? So quite simply, they're required. I am a licensed engineer in the state of Minnesota. I am required to take a minimum number of professional development hours, or PDHs, in order to renew my license every 2 years. So it is required in order to continue to be a professional engineer and practice engineering in the state of Minnesota. And that difference, I know Wisconsin's a little bit different than Minnesota, but largely speaking, in order to continue to be a licensed engineer, you have to take PDHs and ethics. Most importantly, public safety, save lives and prevent injury. Think about the earlier example of the cheap fix versus the right fix. What if the cheap fix was splicing some electrical cable together rather than running a new cable line, and then someday a fire breaks out in that area? So that's a risk to public safety. Ethics keeps you out of trouble. It prevents the legal issues or claims against your company. Again, going back to the example of the dollars. So if a project engineer isn't on site for the duration of that construction project, per the terms of the contract, the client could sue the engineer for breach of contract. Or in a worst case scenario, what if there's an accident or an injury on site and the engineer isn't there? Well, this could cause a lawsuit. So practicing professional ethics keeps you out of trouble. Environmental protections. This is more important than it ever used to be. We are more cognizant of environmental protections than ever before. And then honesty and integrity. I brought that up with, trying to be honest about your skill set or your competence or your experience. The value of being honest and having integrity really, really speaks for itself. And then mostly, and most importantly, it comes down to, and I highlighted this in bold, it comes down to doing the right thing. It is doing the right thing when it comes to these type of situations that arise in your professional life. And I think that ties back into what Nancy's going to talk about next, doing the right thing as it relates to cheating in this world that we live in right now.
Thank you, Benita.
Absolutely.
There will be time for questions after Nancy's part of the presentation. So we're going to turn it over now to Nancy Sundheim. And Benita, I think you have to stop sharing. So at the top of your screen somewhere, there should be a stop share.
Yes. How do I get my thing bigger to do that?
I don't know. Nancy, do you want to try to just share and see if that works?
I can't even get to my screen.
Okay.
All I see is her screen.
I think I can override.
All I have are my people on my screen.
Okay, I just took over from you, and now I just stop.
Excellent.
I'm the boss. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm up. Is that right, Joan?
Yes, it's your turn, Nancy.
Just checking. Okay, I'm Nancy Sundheim from St. Cloud State University, where I developed and now I'm the director of the Manufacturing Engineering Technology program. A couple years ago, Kessler International conducted a study, and they reported 76% of students admitted to copying assignments, 79% admitted to plagiarism, 72% used mobile devices to cheat, and 42% admitted purchasing custom papers. Now, these are just the students who admitted to doing these acts of cheating. Sadly, the study also reported that many thought it was okay to cheat. Now, cheating has always been around, but these results make us wonder, has this become the norm rather than the exception? ProctorU provides online proctoring services for different universities. In January to March of this year, they caught cheating in less than 1% of the 340,000 exams they proctored. In April to June, that number rose to higher than 8%. They even caught an individual taking exams for multiple students from multiple institutions. They even caught on camera behind him, there was a list posted on the wall of all the students he was taking exams for, their institution, their course. He had lists of different websites and resources that he was using to take these exams. Unfortunately, he did not reside in the United States, so they could not prosecute him. These are just exams that are proctored. Many universities cannot afford to provide proctoring services for their faculty. Let's now talk about online tutoring services. For $10 a month, a student can have an account with Chegg where they are promised homework and exam answers within usually 4 to 5 hours. Last spring, there was one class at one institution that it was a large class of 800 students. They caught over 200 getting exam answers from Chegg. Another prominent institution in the country had a class of 250 where they caught 60 of the students getting exam answers from Chegg. Last spring, Chegg got pretty serious about this, and they went from promising exam and homework answers in 4 to 5 hours to just 10 minutes. If you talk to the president of Chegg, the CEO, he indicates that, well, Chegg is not structured for cheating. But if that is truly the case, then why did they suddenly hire additional people so that they can now provide answers in less than 10 minutes? They will remove material from their site, but it's the instructor's responsibility to take a lot of time to constantly monitor their site and then request them to remove it. And unfortunately, they're not alone. There are other such services like Course Hero and Slater providing the exact same service for students. Now let's talk a little more about the acceptance of cheating. We saw in the Kessler study that the students didn't see anything wrong with cheating. In that class of 800 where they caught 200 cheaters who were referred for disciplinary action, they responded to the university with a petition saying, well, we did not know that using Chegg would be considered cheating. It boggles my mind to think that going and having someone else answer your question would not be considered cheating. They also indicated in the petition that the school had no regard for the personal stresses that they were enduring. In yet another prominent institution, a student was in a conversation with an associate dean and indicated that probably 80% of the class is looking on Chegg. What are you going to do? Expel all of us? It's just a part of the culture, unfortunately. And the methods for cheating are a myriad. Probably the most common ones are, first of all, the online tutoring services we've already talked about, collaboration with classmates, having someone else take the exam for you, looking up information if that's not allowed on the exam, and then popular textbooks have been around for quite a long time, and their test banks with complete solution manuals are readily available to the savvy student. They're everywhere. So while cheating has always been around, 30 years ago, a student once tried to get a copy of my husband's exam by breaking into his office. Thankfully, my husband is always a procrastinator, and the exam was still sitting in the trunk of his car. But today, they have much more sophisticated methods for cheating, so it makes it much more difficult to handle. My personal opinion is that it is impossible to prevent all cheating. There's just too much access to advanced technology today. But I do believe there are a number of things we can do to significantly reduce cheating. Keep in mind that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. It's going to depend on the course content and the learning objectives that Dave talked about. It will also depend upon an instructor's individual teaching style. But we do have a handout, and I don't know when that's going to be made available to you. Joan can let you know, but we do have a handout with a lot of tips for reducing cheating. If you take those tips for each situation, you will need to create your own bundle for those those strategies that will work for that particular situation. So the handout has a lot of tips with some explanations, but we're going to just do a quick brief overview of some of the more common, maybe more effective tips. So the first one is monitoring. Of course, you can try to use, if it's available to you, you can use remote proctoring options. Some can be available to a university where the professor themselves can monitor the students, but there's a lot of potential issues with those, including the fact that studies have shown that a student may have their performance quite significantly impacted negatively, much more so on an online proctoring situation than in person. You can also consider, instead of limiting resources, simply make the exam open book, open note. Of course, that requires asking a completely different type of question. We can also restrict access to the student. Lockdown browsers are pretty common. A lockdown browser prevents the student from printing, copy paste, or accessing any other website while they are taking the exam online. Timed exams, it takes time to cheat. So give them limited time. Don't give them all day or 2 hours, just have a shorter amount of time. Also have the exam at the same time. The exam opens at 8, it closes at 8:50 for all students. Now I'm teaching all HighFlex classes this semester, which means a student can take the class fully online, asynchronous, so at their own time, fully online synchronous, so they have to show up at certain times, or fully face-to-face. I did check, even for HighFlex classes with the asynchronous bit, it is legal within the definition of HighFlex to require students to all take the exam at the exact same time if that information is in the syllabus at the beginning of the semester. You can also prohibit backtracking. So in other words, if you present the exam one question at a time, as soon as they submit the one question, they're done with that question and they can no longer go back to that question. Now, personally, I don't believe that's particularly good pedagogy, because I feel like sometimes it has to sit in the back of their head for a while and then they can go back and do better on that question. However, I am using this strategy right now in some of my classes because it's preventing the Chegg syndrome. In other words, they can't sit there and wait on that question for 10 minutes for Chegg to get an answer to them. If they have to move on to the rest of the exam, then they cannot go back to that question once they get their answer from Chegg. And then many learning management systems do allow you to release scores in a delayed fashion, so you don't have to give them the scores right away. You can wait until you're sure that everyone has had the exam before you release scores. And then there are things you can do with the exam structure. You can randomize the order of the questions. A lot of learning management systems will easily do this. That way, I can't say, oh, hey, what'd you get for question number 4? Instead, I would have to ask Dave, well, this is the problem I'm talking about, and it might be his number 12, and it's my number 4. But if we can do that, but it takes longer. So again, it takes time to cheat. You can ask open-ended questions. These are much harder to cheat on. However, they are also a nightmare to grade. So if you have a small class, that can work well, but for larger classes, it's not real practical. Ask those higher order questions that Dave was talking about in his presentation. That can sometimes also make them think at a different level. It's harder to Google that type of question. Give them one question at a time. Don't give them the whole exam, just one question at a time so they can focus on one. And then also it's harder to farm out to their friends. Well, you do this question, I'll do this question, and someone else will do the 4th question. You can write multiple versions of the exam. That means you have to write multiple versions of the exam. So that's the obvious downfall, is it takes a lot more time. And then try to avoid using any test banks from publishers. It's great that they try to make that available to you, but the problem is those solutions are readily available. There's some more information on how to use them a little bit more appropriately in the handout. And then talk about technical issues. You are going to have them. They are going to happen. So expect them and make a plan for them. Again, the handout has a handful of suggestions on maybe how you can address a few things, but you could also be available to them during the exam time. If you're using a lockdown browser, you can't do this, but if you're not, if you're comfortable not using the lockdown browser, you could, like last spring, I would be on Teams. We have Teams at our institution. And so then if a student had a question during the exam, they could directly access me. And then there's some things you can do to the course structure as well. Don't grade on a curve. If my performance depends on Joan's performance, then I'm going to do whatever I can do to beat her out. So taking that element away takes away some of the incentive to cheat. Define cheating. Apparently students didn't seem to think that having someone else provide an answer for them was cheating. So make it very clear that is cheating and it will not be tolerated. Create a contract. Have them actually sign a contract saying they will not cheat. And then you can use more frequent lower stakes assessment. I am using this in one of my classes this semester, and it's actually working quite well. Instead of 3 50-point exams, I'm doing 7 20-point exams through the semester. And the students don't have quite that same drive to cheat because it isn't as much of an impact on their grade, any one. Now that may change toward the end of the semester. We'll see. I'll have to get back to you on that one. So any questions before I explain the breakout room?
Questions for Nancy or Benita?
Okay, then I can go on into the group activity, but I want to give you a little bit of background. I used to always, like every teacher I know, would say, show your work, show your work, show your work. You have to show your work. And students would complain constantly. Why should I have to show my work? I know what the answer is. I got the right answer. Why does it matter? But I finally figured out that I need to link that to the work world. Instead of saying show your work, I substituted statements like always provide justification for your statements. You must have supporting evidence for everything you say. In the work world, you're going to have to document everything, so develop the habit now. The students don't necessarily like this, but they now accept it as a reality. So I have virtually no complaining anymore when I say show your work, when I say show your work in a different way. So what Benita and I were thinking was, if we could maybe do this with the cheating and the professional ethics idea, if we could somehow link cheating to professionalism in the workplace, maybe they would have the incentive to stop cheating in academia. We want students to see the value of the honesty in both the academic and the work world. So I think it's about 15 minutes you have, and I'm going to stop sharing because Joan's going to now.
So first I would like to say, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Benita. That was really wonderful. I put into the chat the handout she was talking about, so I encourage you all to go to the chat. I know some people have just come, so if you can't see it, just put that in the chat. I'll put it there again. If you weren't here when I put it there, you can't see it. We have basically the same groups as before, but I had to reshuffle, and we've had some people join us. So when you go to your groups, just again, welcome the new people. So I think that's it for directions. I'm going to send you off again, unless there's any questions before we go. After the breakout rooms, then we'll have a little time for discussion again, and there'll be a little bit more time for questions. So, all right, everyone, go enjoy this. Enjoy the time we get to spend with other people and colleagues. David, are you here now? Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Would you like to share what you talked about in your groups?
Our group was, we had Educator, industry, just a youth development trio program. So we had a lot of variety in ours, and some of the things that come out, we really had a discussion about, you know, addressing cheating even in the industry. So we walked our way around on, Bob had shared about the importance of retention, of documentation from a professional standpoint, talking about, you know what, I got some stuff that goes back 5 years. I got some stuff that goes back even farther, but it really walks into, these are the specifications and this is the documentation we retained. So so it proves I have worked in an ethical, style. One thing I thought was really interesting, David had shared to the group, he's really shifted a lot of his programming for his students to be much more project-based or product-based type of opportunity and learning opportunity. So then the assessment process becomes a lot more of how the students work together. There isn't really a way to be able to cheat and look it up. You can see how much they're inputting into their projects. So I thought that was really good. And then Dawn had shared, you know what, working with the trade and tech, that's a different group. There you just have to prove that you can weld a bead, you can weld whatever. But she did share the importance of, you know what, having a paper trail and ensuring that paper trail is truly representative of your ethical position and views and what that looks like. So we had a wonderful variety.
Well, one of the groups I was in, I really appreciated what the industry individual said. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. But it pointed out that oftentimes you do have open-ended problems in the work world, and cheating's not an option. It's just simply not an option. If you don't have an answer, you're gonna have to figure it out. So maybe trying to make that connection that, you know, you get into the work world, cheating's not an option. So how are you gonna figure this out? Someone else in that group also indicated that that's what he indicates to his students is essentially the same thing, that if you don't know this, you better figure it out now because there's no chance later.
To add to that, we talked about, you know, opportunities for students to hear directly from professionals and the impact of lying and cheating, you know, as a professional. Les, I would love for you to share, you know, your take on your approach with employees.
Oh, and it's back to the story that everybody's been talking about, is that the students get all the training. If they go out into the real world to work, the idea that you're going to be able to lie and cheat your way to long-term success, honestly, it's not impossible, but it only works for a very small percentage of the real serious con people in the world. But, and at our place, you know, one of the issues is that one of the rules that everybody knows, I'm real upfront about it, is if I find out you've been lying to me, you're unemployed. End of message. It's not something for debate. It's not something to discuss. And there have been people that have been dismissed. And you know, and you just work hard to try and build a team. We're just a small company. We only got 9 people. So it's pretty clear who's who. And I think it is easier if you work in a company where there's 10,000 people. I'm an old ex-GE employee like Jason. Then a lot of things can happen inside that. But then you can look at what happened to GE. You know, might be a classic story. And but I think it's really a critical thing. And the issue, and then we had a discussion about the idea, would it be helpful to the teachers to have professionals, you know, people who are working, come into the classrooms to talk about those very topics? To be able to reinforce that regardless of what you learned in kindergarten or the 5th grade or what your parents have approved of, the majority of the world out there doesn't buy it. being honest and having, and I think it goes back to the combination of the morals tied to the ethics, which are all tied in, do you cheat?
I just throw in what Ben Walsh from IDOM made the comment there, and I'll put a commercial in there. IDOM is a major sponsor of the foundation, which helps fund these types of workshops here. But anyway, he made the comment that in academia, we need more real world problems, examples. And I think one needs to kind of start that at the freshman level there. So Ben brings up a very good point that I think we'd have probably less cheating if we had more realistic problems in our classes.
I strongly agree with that. The experiential learning is the way to become good engineers.
So Les, you're on my industry advisory board. When are you going to come talk to my students?
I think the last time I was at a couple of meetings, I was someplace else. But I'll come anytime. You just got to let me know. It's just a matter of getting on the spot.
And I would like to have, if you go someplace and then record a video, then maybe I can use it for my students, if it is possible.
I think the other thing we can do is that I think it's feasible to recruit more industry folks to come to be involved into the education system. I know in our area, that's a big thing, to get the industry tied into the schools.
I think you pretty much all hit on exactly what the point we were trying to make. The group that's putting these sessions together is trying to bring industry and education together. And this whole seminar, we're trying to put together the fact that if you have assessments that matter to the students, they're going to be less likely to cheat. And I'm a licensed engineer and a professor, so I emphasize that ethics part in my classes, and I've seen how the effect it has on the students to talk about things like that, not overselling your abilities. And when you use CHEG and these things, you're overselling your abilities and keeping on bringing them back to what they're really here for. And so I think you've all just mentioned, you got the point we were trying to get across. So I think that's really terrific. Is there anyone else before I sum up here that wants to share anything? So the last point I'd like to make, though, is that cheating is a huge issue, and I have colleagues, especially in math, that are fighting this every day, and they get chegged to take their tests down, and then the next day a different test ends up there, and it's like an ongoing battle, and you can get really kind of sucked into it, and I think it's really important to be aware of it, but it's also you can't let it take away the joy of teaching, because it can really make our jobs just awful. And it's not the majority of the students. We do have students that are here to learn, and keep that focus on those students too, because otherwise this job it becomes untenable. So anyway, with that, I think I thank you all very much. You're going to receive a survey in a day or two and we would really appreciate it if you filled out that survey. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason and Katie in just a second here. But also, there were questions about CEUs and PDHs. I got it right this time. But you just have to contact Jason, and anyway, Jason, I'll make sure you talk about that too. So thank you all very much for coming, and I turn it over to Jason and Katie to take us out now.
So Katie, I'll let you lead out.
Great, yeah, thank you, Joan, and thank you everyone for joining us today. With Engineering Alliance Foundation Minnesota, we are, looking to be part of bringing connections with the industry and STEM professionals or STEM educators. So we're grateful to be able to collaborate with Jason, and I'd like to thank Chuck Clanton, our board president, for joining us here this morning, who wrote down he's with the University of Minnesota, which he is, but he's also our board chair. So we hope to be able to bring more of these to the industry and find different ways that we can bring forward some conversations. I think it's important, especially with these ethics pieces, that we just take some time out to talk through it. I found that when we do that with our professional licensure programs, that it's just helpful to take some time to talk through it, and we get ideas from each other, and then go back to our individual professional worlds. And I would like to especially thank Benita for representing the professional consulting engineering industry today. It was great having you bring forward those pieces. So Jason.
All right, well, thank you. I want to thank Joan, David, Nancy, and Benita again for everything they did, content, and support with that. Katie, I want to thank you and your organization for bringing that professional portion to it. How many times can we get industry and academia together? This is a wonderful environment to do this. So we're working our way towards having more of these and having this connection. Again, on the agenda, it does show how to get a hold of me, and be patient with me on getting that out to you for your hours. You're looking at a solo team here, so hang with me. I'll get it out to you when you can. I love the comment of the real world. If you want to go check out some of the stuff on our website, we have a lot of real world stuff for K-16 outreach. Reach out to me for opportunities on other things. And we're also working on, so you professionals out there, we're also working on the creation of a database, and you'll probably get connected up on that, asking professionals to sign up to be part of a database so we can offer you up to be able to speak to these young people that are really looking for these opportunities to learn, help these instructors to have some tools available to them, so then when they want a professional to speak to their classes. And really keep in mind, you're just delivering content about what you do every day, and the importance and the professionalism you carry. These students, they yearn for it, and if you want to be able to have that opportunity to speak to it, we're trying to create that environment so these faculty members can support these young people of the future. So anticipate seeing that. That's early. We're working on it, and we'll be getting that out to have you professionals sign up for that. And then that will be made available for not only our K-12, but also our post-secondary educators as well, because they're always looking for not only speakers, but you know what, if you want to speak to capstone projects, they're also looking for capstone projects as well. So you bring a lot to the table. So thank you all. Thank you all for all your help and support, and look forward to this again in the spring and or late winter. Be well and be safe, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yep, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for moderating again, Joan. You did a wonderful job.
It was fun.